"Your discharge papers are in the kitchen. Don't forget them on your way out." That was it. No hug. No thank you for your service. Just Miriam Holt standing at the top of the stairs in her silk robe, one hand on the railing, the other holding a mug of coffee she hadn't offered to share. Lennox had been awake since 4. She always was. Old habit from Fort Bragg that her body refused to let go of. She didn't say anything back. She went to the kitchen, folded the papers, and put them in the front pocket of her duffel. Then she zipped it shut. Then she picked it up. And then she walked out of the house she had lived in for 3 years. The house her father had bought with his pension. The house she had mowed and painted and repaired the gutters on twice. And she didn't look back at it. Not because she was strong, because she was afraid that if she looked at it, she would sit down on the front steps and not get up again. Her name was Lennox Carver, 26 years old, honorably discharged from the 75th Ranger Regiment 8 months prior, with a fractured fibula, a commendation she never framed, and a recurring dream about a checkpoint outside of Mosul that she would never tell anyone about. She was built narrow and precise, the kind of woman who moved like she was always conserving energy for something that hadn't happened yet. She kept her hair close cropped. She had a small scar under her left jaw from a training accident in Georgia that most people never noticed and she never explained. Her father, Winston Carver, had been a good man. Not a perfect one, but a good one. He'd worked 31 years for the Postal Service and spent his weekends building things in the garage. Birdhouses, mostly, which he gave away to neighbors who didn't ask for them. He died on a Tuesday in March from a stroke that came without warning. Lennox had been overseas. By the time she got back stateside, the funeral was done and the house had a new woman in it. Miriam Holt had been dating Winston for 2 years before he died. Lennox had met her exactly 4 times. The 5th time they were in the same room was at the reading of the will. And Lennox found out that her father, in a document signed 6 months before his death. During a period, Lennox now suspected Miriam had managed very carefully, had left the house to both of them equally. Half to Lennox, half to Miriam. The lawyer's name was Fenwick. He had soft hands and didn't look at Lennox once during the entire reading. He looked at Miriam. He spoke to Miriam. When Lennox asked a question, he answered it in the direction of the window. "What that means practically," Miriam said after Fenwick left, "is that we have to come to an arrangement." The arrangement lasted 8 months. Lennox slept in her childhood bedroom with a duffel bag she never fully unpacked, because some part of her, the part that had been trained to read environments for threat level, knew this situation was not permanent. She paid half the utilities. She fixed the water heater. She recaulked the bathroom. She did not complain. She did not make scenes. She had learned in the Army that the people who make scenes rarely win the thing they're fighting over. But Miriam had a different kind of training. The kind that comes from 40 years of knowing how to make someone feel like a guest in their own life. She stopped using Lennox's name after the 1st month. She called her you or her. In conversations she had with people on the phone, loudly, in the hallway outside Lennox's room. She moved Winston's photograph from the living room to the garage. When Lennox moved it back, it was in the garage again the next morning. She invited her son, a 40-year-old named Philip. Not the same Philip from any of Lennox's memories, a stranger, with cologne that smelled like a department store and opinions about everything, to stay in the guest room indefinitely. Philip ate Lennox's groceries. Philip parked behind Lennox's car. Philip once looked at Lennox across the breakfast table and said, "You know, she's been talking about selling." Lennox looked at him. This isn't her house to sell. He shrugged and went back to his phone. That was February. By April, Miriam had gotten Fenwick involved again. There was a buyout offer, below market, insulting below market, that Lennox was supposed to sign. When Lennox said no, Miriam stopped speaking to her at all. The house became a cold war conducted entirely in temperature, Miriam would turn the thermostat down to 62 at night. Lennox would put on a fleece and not mention it. Then one morning, Lennox came downstairs and found a locksmith in the living room, and Fenwick at the kitchen table with a folder. "She has legal standing," Fenwick said, not to Lennox, to the folder. Given the shared title and the documented history of— "What documented history?" Lennox said. He finally looked at her. "There have been complaints filed." She asked what complaints. He said he wasn't at liberty. She asked who filed them. He straightened his papers. Miriam stood in the kitchen doorway with her coffee mug and said, in the voice of someone who has practiced this moment, "I think it's best if you find somewhere else while we sort this out legally." Lennox was quiet for a long time, long enough that Fenwick shifted in his seat. Then she said, "Give me 2 hours to pack." Miriam looked surprised. She had expected, Lennox suspected, crying or arguing, or the kind of scene that would look bad for Lennox later in a courtroom. Lennox didn't give her any of it. She went upstairs, put everything she owned into 2 bags, and came back down in 90 minutes. She took her father's watch from the nightstand. A Seiko automatic with a cracked crystal, the kind that winds itself when you move, which her father had worn every day for 20 years, until the day he died, and she put it on her wrist. On the way out, she stopped in the living room. Miriam was standing there, watching, still holding the mug. "My father's photograph," Lennox said. "The one from the mantel. I don't know what you're talking about." She did. They both knew she did. Lennox looked at her for one more second, then picked up her bags and walked out the door. She sat in her car in the driveway for 4 minutes. Not crying, just sitting. Watching the house through the windshield, the gutters she had cleaned, the porch light she had replaced, the front walk she had resealed with a bag of concrete patch she'd bought at Home Depot on a Saturday morning when Miriam wasn't awake yet, because the crack was a trip hazard, and she couldn't stand to look at it. Then she started the car and left. She stayed with her army friend DeShonda for 6 weeks in a 1-bedroom apartment in Clarksville. She slept on the couch. She was quiet and clean, and she washed her dishes immediately, and she walked DeShonda's dog every morning at 5 a.m. because she was already awake. DeShonda didn't ask too many questions. That was why they were still friends. During those 6 weeks, Lennox did 3 things. She got a job, private security, corporate contract work, the kind that paid well, and asked very few questions about her psychological state, which suited her fine. She got a storage unit for her father's things that Miriam hadn't yet disposed of. She'd hired a lawyer of her own, a woman named Calloway, who had eyes like a corrections officer, and who filed a motion to preserve the estate property within 48 hours of being retained. And she opened a savings account at a credit union and put every dollar she wasn't spending directly into it. This is the part people don't understand about Lennox. They hear the story, and they expect rage. They expect a woman who spent years plotting, seething, building toward some cinematic act of revenge. That's not what happened. What happened is that she got up every morning, put on her boots, went to work, came home, did it again. She'd been doing that since she was 18. It was the only thing she knew that consistently worked. She also read a lot of real estate listings, not obsessively, just the way she used to read terrain maps, quietly, regularly, until the information settled into a kind of fluency. The first year, she learned the market. The second year, she got her real estate license, mostly because she was curious about the other side of the transactions she was watching. The security work was good money, but it was also the kind of work that ages you in specific ways, and she was already old enough inside. By year 3, she had enough saved, combined with what she'd recovered from the estate dispute. Calloway had won her a settlement that covered the below-market insult Miriam had tried to push through, plus legal fees, to buy a small duplex in East Nashville. She rented one unit and lived in the other, and fixed everything herself. Year 4, she bought another one. Year 5, she quit the security job. By year 7, Lennox Carver owned 11 units across 3 properties and was under contract on a 4th. She had a property manager, a bookkeeper, and an accountant named Odette who called her every quarter to tell her things were going well in a tone of voice that suggested she found this mildly suspicious. Lennox didn't go to networking events. She didn't have a personal brand. She wore the same boots she'd worn since Fort Bragg, and she drove a truck that needed a new side mirror, and she was, by any reasonable measure, doing fine. She did not think about Miriam Holt very often. When she did, it was the way you think about weather. Something that happened, that you moved through, that shaped certain decisions without being the reason for them. Then, in the spring of her 8th year out of that house, her phone rang. It was Calloway. "I thought you should know," she said, "before you hear it some other way. The house on Braddock is in foreclosure." Lennox was quiet. Miriam Holt stopped making payments 14 months ago. The bank filed in January. It goes to auction in 6 weeks. "Okay," Lennox said. "I'm not calling to suggest anything," Calloway said. "I'm just calling because I told you I would if I ever heard anything, and I heard this." Lennox thanked her and hung up. She sat at her kitchen table. Her kitchen table, in her house, the one she'd bought and renovated and made into something that felt like somewhere she lived on purpose. And she looked out the window for a while. There was a cardinal on the fence. She watched it. Her father had loved cardinals. He'd built a feeder for them out of cedar scraps one winter and hung it outside the kitchen window on Braddock and called it his retirement project. She picked up her phone and called Odette. "I want to look at something," she said. She did not buy the house at auction. She didn't need to. The bank, once they'd processed the foreclosure, listed it through a broker. Lennox made an offer in cash, below list, not insultingly below, just enough below to be accepted quickly. The broker called back in 4 hours. She signed the paperwork the following week, in an office downtown, with a pen that didn't write very well and that she had to press hard with, which seemed right somehow. The property manager she assigned to the house was a woman named Terry, who had worked with Lennox for 4 years and who asked very few unnecessary questions. "There's a tenant," Terry said, "month to month. Hasn't been served notice yet. I'll handle the walkthrough myself," Lennox said. "You never do the walkthroughs. I'll do this one." She drove to Braddock on a Thursday morning. She parked in front of the house and sat in her truck for a few minutes. The gutters had leaves in them. The porch light she'd replaced was gone. A different fixture now, one of those plastic ones that come in a 4-pack. The front walk had cracked again, worse than before. Nobody had sealed it. She got out of the truck and walked up to the front door. She knocked. There was a long pause. Then the sound of footsteps. Then the door opened, and Miriam Holt was standing on the other side of it, looking older than Lennox expected, and wearing the same silk robe, or one exactly like it, and holding a coffee mug. Her expression moved through several things very quickly: confusion, then recognition, then something that might have been embarrassment if it had anywhere to land. "I'm here to do the new owner walkthrough," Lennox said. Miriam stared at her. "May I come in?" There was a very long pause. The kind that has a lot of things moving through it that neither person is going to say out loud. "You're the—" Miriam started. "Yes." Miriam stepped back from the door. Lennox walked in. The house smelled different. It smelled like someone else's cooking and someone else's candles and years of different choices. The photograph wasn't on the mantel. Lennox hadn't expected it to be. Winston's birdhouses were gone from the garage. She'd check later. The water heater she'd fixed was still running. She could hear it clicking from where she stood in the hallway. She walked through each room with a clipboard she didn't really need, making notes she was already making in her head. She checked the window seals. She tested the faucets. She looked at the ceiling in the master bedroom, where there had been a slow leak the summer before she left, and found that it had been patched badly and was going to need doing properly. Miriam followed her from a distance, not speaking, just following. In the kitchen, Lennox opened the cabinet under the sink and checked the pipes. Then she stood up and turned around. Philip was standing in the doorway. He was heavier now, and the cologne was the same, and he had the same expression he'd had that morning at the breakfast table, except it didn't have anywhere to go this time. Lennox looked at him. Then she looked back at her clipboard. "You'll receive a formal letter from my property manager within the week," she said. "The month-to-month arrangement will be converting to a standard 12-month lease. I'll need the space documentation completed and returned within 30 days. She closed the cabinet under the sink. "There's also a crack in the front walk," she said. "I'll have that repaired at no charge to the current tenants. It's a safety issue." She picked up her clipboard. She looked at Miriam one more time. Miriam's hands were very still around the coffee mug. That was the only thing that moved on her, or didn't move. Those hands. "I would have let you buy me out," Lennox said quietly. Not angry, not triumphant. Just saying it, the way you state a fact that's been true for a long time and has finally run out of reason to stay private. 8 months I lived here, and I never once tried to make your life difficult. I fixed things. I paid my half. I just wanted to live in my father's house. Miriam didn't say anything. "You can stay," Lennox said. "The lease will be fair. Terry will be your point of contact for anything maintenance related." She turned toward the hallway. "The gutters need to come down before winter. I'll have someone out in October." She walked to the front door and opened it. The morning was already warm. The kind of warm that means the rest of the day will be hot. She stood on the porch for a second and looked at the yard. The oak tree in the corner that her father had planted when she was 4, which was now taller than the roof line, which was not something he ever got to see. And then she walked down the front steps. The crack in the walk was worse up close. She made a note on her clipboard. She'd have Terry's crew out within the month. Concrete patch, the right mix this time, sealed properly. She got in her truck. She set the clipboard on the passenger seat. On her wrist, under the cuff of her jacket, the Seiko was ticking, winding itself with every movement, the way it always had, the way it had on Winston Carver's wrist for 20 years before it was hers. She pulled out of the driveway and drove toward the interstate, and the morning opened up ahead of her, wide and unremarkable and completely her own.